A somber farewell to a man who spent his entire life in service to others. The nation paid its final respects this week to former President Jimmy Carter. The tribute stretched from his native Plains, Georgia to there, Washington, D.C. Thousands viewed Mr. Carter's casket inside the Capitol Rotunda, and thousands more attended his funeral service on Thursday. There are many stories told about his life in public service and his devotion to causes ranging from civil rights to building homes for others.
When he saw a tiny 600-person village that everybody else thinks of as poor, he recognized it. That's where he was from. That's who he was. And he never saw it as a place to send pity. It was always a place to find partnership.
We saw Jimmy as he always was, at peace, with a life fully lived, a good life, a purpose and meaning, of character, driven by destiny, and filled with the power of faith, hope, and love.
Jimmy Carter is also remembered for his time at the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis. At his funeral, former Congressman and U.S. Ambassador Andrew Young shared this piece of history about a request that Carter made upon joining the Academy.
When he went to the Naval Academy, he asked that his roommate be the first black midshipman to come to Annapolis. And he said, I know minorities. I've been a minority most of my life, and maybe I can help him in his adjustments.
He went on to say this was a reflection of Carter's character in and out of office. Carter graduated from the Naval Academy in 1946. Here now to talk to us a little bit about the history of Jimmy Carter in the U.S. Navy is the Director of Naval History, Sam Cox. Good to see you, Sam.
How do you do?
I'm doing well. I think what is impressive about the story of Jimmy Carter is that his desire to be at the U.S. Naval Academy came as a very young child.
Absolutely, before first grade.
Before
he wanted
first
to
grade.
go. Yep.
Tell me about that, because there's a family connection there, and it just stayed in his heart, I suppose.
Well, his uncle, Tom Gordy, was an enlisted radioman in the U.S. Navy. Okay. And normally from that part of Plains, it's not a big Navy town. Okay. But he was influenced by his uncle to join the service.
By the time he becomes president, he was the fifth consecutive president who had been at least associated with the Navy.
Or in the Navy,
In the Navy.
Yeah. So,
I mean, an impressive run there, I'm guessing.
That's true. We like to take credit for it. Yes, sir.
I'll read you a quote, and you had it in a piece that you sent to me. They were saying that he's the embodiment of the very highest ideals of our nation, and they used the word inspiration. Why is that? Tell me about what was inside of Jimmy Carter that brought that out.
I think it's his sense of honor, that it's from partly religious, but partly from the Naval Academy, honor concept. He kept that his whole career.
He ends up on a submarine at some point, and there was a harrowing tale about him on this submarine. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, he's on about the second day on the submarine that's crossing the Pacific in a really bad storm. He's on the surface. He gets washed off the bridge of the ship, of the submarine, and luckily he's able to grab onto the gun that's afterwards. It kept him from being washed aboard. Had he not been able to do that, we'd be talking Jimmy Carter lost at sea.
Yeah, and one part of that story I hear that the word never got back to Rosalind, and he was okay with that.
That's correct, because he left her in Plains when he went to the submarine duty.
Do you think, or how do you think his work within the Navy influenced the way he operated as the commander-in-chief in Washington, D.C.?
Well, when you're in the Navy, when you're in the military, things tend to be, you have courses of action, you have very kind of rigid planning process that you go through, and the object is to do the right thing, not necessarily the politically best thing. Sure. And that may have, affected how his presidency went. Yeah. He wasn't much of a politician, to be honest.
Sure. Hey, he was a bit of a trailblazer, so to speak, within the Navy, because if you know, I guess, naval history, those submarines were diesel for a while, and then he becomes a part of a program that saw all of that change.
That's correct. He's one of the very first officers in the Navy nuclear power program. He never went to sea on a nuclear submarine, but he was responsible for preparing the power plant for the second atomic-powered submarine in the Navy when his father died and he resigned his commission.
For people who don't understand why that's such a big deal, tell me about nuclear-powered submarines and what the advantage that it gave moving away from diesel fuel.
Well, diesel fuel, diesel electric has to come up, get air, and recharge the batteries. While a nuclear-powered submarine can stay underwater pretty much forever,
Sure.
Until it's run out of food.
I remember growing up, Gulf Wars were going on. The Persian Gulf was a word just ingrained in you as a kid in history class. Jimmy Carter's Carter Doctrine had a big to-do with some of that area. Tell me a bit about the doctrine.
Well, the Carter Doctrine was in reaction to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. In the State of Union address in 1980, President Carter laid out that we have vital interests in the Persian Gulf region. If someone tried to take over that area, we were prepared to defend it with force.
A little also about his humanitarian effort, because I think that that's what people rings so true to people right now. I think the image that people have, not of him in the Oval Office, but with a hammer in his hand, and I'm guessing a lot of that service in his life comes back to his naval experience.
I would agree with that. You know,
Yeah.
you serve your country. If you stop serving it one way, you serve it another.
Sure.
It kind of gets in you.
Yeah, got about a minute left. For you, what's impressive to you when you think Jimmy Carter, and I'm sure you've been talking a lot about it the last couple of days. What to you touches you?
Well, I think he was decent, highly intelligent, and honorable. I mean, you know, politicians, you got to spin somewhat, but I think he was a truthful person as much as he could be. His book, Why Not the Best, when he was running for president, actually influenced me to go to the Naval Academy. Yeah. It's good for him, good for me. Yeah. He was a cross-country runner, I was a cross-country runner. You know, so here I am 47 years later.
Oh my goodness.
I owe my career to Jimmy Carter.
Comes back to that word inspiration, huh?
Yep.
Sam
Yes,
Cox, good to see you, sir.
All right,
Thanks for coming by. Yep.
Sure.